This is Moments of the Movement, Civil Rights and Change in America.
I'm Lonnie Bunch, founding director of the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture. Welcome to Moments of the Movement. Opinions about the best strategy for winning civil rights for African Americans in the 1950s and 1960s were almost as numerous as the many leaders in the struggle. Activist and black nationalist John Churchville knew that as well as anyone. Known best as the founder of the Freedom Library Day School in his native Philadelphia, Churchville found himself at the crossroads of many intraracial struggles during the freedom movement. Though a student of Malcolm X and black nationalism, he joined the integrationist-minding Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee to register and to work with voters in Georgia and Mississippi, often finding himself at odds with the SNCC leadership. But differing philosophies weren't only the bastion of high-minded civil rights leaders. Sometimes the fight was taken to the streets.
I was about 17 or 18, I became a Muslim, an Ahmadiyya Muslim.
Wow.
And say how cool my mom was. Her thing was, hey, whatever gets you to take a bath and put clean clothes on, I'm fine with it. Gee whiz, you know, you want to wash 5 times a day, please be my guest. So she would let me, she would do some of the recipes that I'd learned, get, and she'd cook them for me and enjoyed it. She was so comfortable in her own skin and in her own beliefs that her thing was explore, do what you need to do. And if you can tell me Islam is better than Jesus, I'll switch. I mean, that was her line. I met a guy who was really sharp. He was young, maybe a year older than me. And he'd come around and he would talk about black history, and he would talk about Islam and Islamic history and stuff that went on. And it's like, wow, you mean the Moors that I've read about were black people and they created the culture that is in Spain today? When I look at all those beautiful things out of Spain that black people, you mean to tell me the stuff I read in my textbooks that blacks have not made any contribution to culture and the world except for their dances and minstrel shows? Wow, that isn't so. I mean, that was the catalyst, and it was a different identity. It was fun. He was young, I was young, and and by the way, my Muslim name is Yahya Abdul Hamid. So that was who I was for a period. I'm very much John Elliott Churchville these days, but I always give people credit for what they bring to my life and how they enrich my life. You'll find I'm very eclectic in my learnings and my appreciation for stuff. Anyway, so I did that, and then I moved to New York. And then through all of this, and it was one of the reasons why I loved my mother so much, she was so open. She was never threatened by anything that I came up with. She was just very supportive of me. And after when I had been in New York for a while, I had this opportunity to go south. This is where the SNCC story starts. Yeah. I had this opportunity. I was working as a janitor at Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center in Harlem. And there was this bus that needed to go down to somewhere in Georgia, but it wasn't Atlanta. SNCC was having some kind of retreat, and the bus was supposed to be delivered to them. And I kind of lost my job, and there were people living in one of the negative sides of running into all these wonderful people that I met is people were always looking for a place to crash. They never paid rent. They just came, ate my food, stayed in the spot, brought their friends. And I was at a point where, there were like 5 people in my apartment. that I was responsible for the rent for, and it was rent control. I think it was something like $50 a month. It was ridiculous. But anyway, I decided I don't have anything to do. I'm not working. I'm not planning to go back to school now. I mean, sure, I'll get on the bus and take a ride. I mean, it was purely a matter of taking a ride. So I went with some other guys, and we went down, and when we got to Georgia, I was really impressed by the young people that I met, who were my age and white and black, and they're like all college students, and they're talking about freedom, justice, and equality. And I'm like, okay, I can buy this. And so I hooked up with Reverend Charles Sherrod. Charles Sherrod was an interesting guy to begin with. And he was just a die-hard integrationist. I mean, the whole notion of black and white together. So it was interesting with my experiences when I had been in New York. What I didn't mention is while I was in New York, and I had this Ahmadiyya Muslim background. And then when I got to New York, and I would spend days and evenings up at 125th Street and 7th Avenue in front of Michaud's bookstore and listen to the nationalists give their speeches, and I met Malcolm X, and I went to Temple Number 7 and stayed, and I was just so impressed. This guy was so brilliant. And after the service was over, I went up to him and I said, Minister Malcolm, tell me about your life. And he said something that really, he said, my life is irrelevant. Where I've come from and where I am now is irrelevant. What matters is that we as a people get our act together and forge ahead and do something, for ourselves and stop waiting on other people to do things for us. And that just, the humility, and he was hot stuff in terms of the press. I mean, everybody was vilifying him, but he was hot stuff. I mean, everybody was, Malcolm. And his whole demeanor was, I don't matter. Getting your head straight matters. Getting the rest of our heads together matters. And that just stuck, it just rang in my head. So when I went down to SNCC, I was a black nationalist by the time I went down to SNCC. I had a white partner, and when I went out with my white partner to register people to vote, the black people that we dealt with would always look to the white partner because they were dealing with the power symbol. And from a purely egocentric point of view, it was bad enough to be in the North and ignored by white folk. And it was just intolerable to be ignored by my own folk. I mean, I couldn't take it. So I went back to Charles Sherrod. I said, look, man, I need a black partner. I don't want to do this with a white partner. And I had no problem. This was not personal, it was business. I mean, I loved every person that I met in SNCC. It wasn't that, it was that I needed to work with a black partner, and I believed that I had a way of getting more young black people to register to vote. And so Sherrod came up with this deal. If you can get more people, I'll let you do that, but if you can't register more people than you can with the partner that I gave you, you gotta go back. I said, fine, I'll do that. So I got a black partner, and that's when we started working in Americas. And at the time, this is really fun stuff here. At the time, there was, if you can believe this, there was a gang war going on in Americas, Georgia. I mean, we're trying to register people to vote, and in the black community, you got these two teenage black gangs at war. And I just went in the middle of a gang fight and started screaming and hollering, you dumb, bleh. And they just stopped. I said, this is what white folks want you to do. Why are you doing this? We're here to help you to register so you can get some power for real. Stop fighting each other. They stopped gang warring. We were able to recruit them to first register themselves and then to negotiate a peace treaty and help us go out and recruit people to register and vote. If I had tried that in North Philly, I'd have been dead today. And it was the black talk, it was the black rap, it was the reason the rationale for voting is not to integrate. The rationale for voting is to build a power base so you can elect people who look like you to office, who will do for you what people who don't look like you will do. And that was, for me, that was the beginning of what I call Black Power. And that was not looked on lightly or nicely by the SNCC folks, but they tolerated me. And I give Charlie Sherrod a great deal of respect for putting up with me, given his own views. And I think that, and he was always, he said, you're rebelling. As far as I was concerned, Martin was, he was too easy, he was too light, he was not on point. Well, part of my anger, which I picked up from SNCC folks, was here we are in Albany trying to clean up after his mess. He wouldn't even stay because it wasn't working. SNCC stayed and continued to try to work when the cameras weren't there. And so that was a source of in fact, it was for me, in fact, I have to admit that it was only at his death that I was wondering why I was mourning so much, because I always held against him. I had issues with him about Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party and the role that he played in trying to get them to line up to the Democratic Party and not let them do what they needed to do. So, so I had real issues. It was only at his death that I said, oh God, this was my brother. And I may disagree with his tactics, but, unfortunately, I got to respect him after his demise, but had very little respect for him prior to it. When we started, we were just collecting books by and about Black people and beginning to put them up in the library. And then we had Wednesday night history classes, and we'd have adults. And Wednesday nights were fun because we would get people from the bar next door. And what was wonderful is I began to look at people differently. All my life, people who hung out, in my mind, people who hung out in the bars were drunkards, whatever. And this is, of course, before, I believe it was before Cheers was on the air. So I learned before Cheers came on that people really like bars because everybody knows their name. And so when we had our Black History lectures, people from the bar would come over and would share their knowledge. I mean, you can't tell based on who knows what. And so sometimes I would have done my homework and my research and I'd begin to hold forth. And guy from the bar next door would say, no, that didn't happen until 1875. This is what happened, bang. And he starts talking. And then the other people would chime in, oh yes, well that was, have you read such and such, John? No, I haven't. Well, I'm gonna bring it to you next week. Before you talk to us again about this, you need to read that. And so it was a wonderful, it was both humbling and exciting because it helped me early on to realize you're not here to solve a problem. You're here to learn and elicit from people what they know and empower them to do what they need to do. And so your job is to provide an opportunity and take that same opportunity yourself to learn where people's heads are, to appreciate them, to encourage them. And so I learned so much from those early sessions, which were really booked as, I'm going to teach you Black history. That's how I started. And it got to be, let's talk about Black history and let's hope I can learn some along the way.
Oral histories were conducted by the Southern Oral History Program in the Center for the Study of the American South at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill on behalf of the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture and the Library of Congress. Moments of the Movement, Civil Rights, and Change in America comes to you from new visions, new voices, expanding the American conversation, because it's time to hear the difference. With support from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Visit us online at newvisionsnewvoices.org.